again, everyone. Welcome to 90s to Now. I am Jerry Strauss. You are you. We are here, and we're ready to have a good time again on 90s to Now because we're talking to one of our favorites. And this guy is somebody that we've watched in so many things. One of them, perhaps in the eyes of many, standing tall above the rest, just as far as our 90s memories go. But we're going to talk about all of it. He's here. He's now. He's Ajay Naidu. How are you, man?
Hi, how are you? It's so good to be here. So good
I,
to talk to you.
Let me ask you this, and right off the bat, because I don't know if this is an insecurity thing or quite what I'm dealing with here. When I come across a name that I read, have not heard spoken out loud, and don't immediately know how to pronounce it, I get anxiety about that. How's this going to go? How
Good.
close am I going to get?
I'm glad you're anxious.
Do
No,
you
no.
get?
Look. My whole life, growing up, I was AJ. You know what I mean? That's kind of like And it's funny because I would always introduce myself as like, "Hey, I'm Jay," or "Hey, I'm Ajay," but it'd be like, "Yeah, AJ, what's up?" So I mean, it was kind of like ignored. When I got to drama school, everyone was like, "No, we can say your name. It's Ajay," and I was like, "That's my name." But the mnemonic I have for people remembering my first name anyway is my name's a J, like I am going to smoke a J.
That
Seems to
works.
stick. Anyway, that's good. And my last name is Naidu, which is like if you changed my first name to vodka, then it would be Vodka Naidu. So it's like that. The best thing that those are the two mnemonics I have for how to say my name. So it's J Naidu. Anyway,
Does it bother you
that's it.
when?
No, it doesn't. But I mean, like as long as people are being cool, I don't care what they call me. You know what I mean? I can see in their faces when they're a little bit when they get jumpy about it. But that's okay. I'm always like, it's cool, man. It's Ajay, and I don't really hate on people for it unless they're just like AJ man, and they can't stop it. And then
Right.
I'm like, okay, man, just call me Jay.
Yeah.
If it's what I mean. So.
It's one thing to tiptoe into it. It's another to really lean into it, and
Yeah,
even when you're getting it wrong.
yeah, I mean, if you're like satisfied, you're getting it wrong, then I think I have a little problem. But if you're like, listen, man, can you tell me how to say it? I'm always cool with it. So thanks for trying, thanks for working on it, thanks for asking.
And to this very day, I think about 30% of anyone I've ever come across still thinks my name is Gary for some reason. They can read it, they can see it. Their minds just go to Gary. It's
Well,
very.
G Jerry, G,
I know. I don't make it
I
easy.
think that's pretty American. I mean, like, I don't think a British person is going to call you Gary. Looking at that, you know what I mean. It's definitely Jerry. You
Yeah,
know what I mean. So there we are.
I'm in the wrong country.
Gerald.
That's
Anyway,
the issue. Uh,
yeah.
Look, you must have people coming up to you all the time. We're going to talk about all the millions of things that you've done, but I think I have to imagine that a big chunk of people recognize you first and foremost for your work in office space.
Yes.
Is that
Yeah.
something that you hear every day? Is that the biggest thing people?
It's the like the yeah, I would say that it is the I guess the most iconic sort of thing that people know me from or know me as. And yeah, I mean, there's people. I mean, you can really see people's personalities come out in how they bring it up. You know what I mean? Which is kind of interesting. Some people are like, man, yeah, man, the movie, come on, man. And some people are like, other people are like, a little bit more. They're like, naga work here. I mean, like, the blinded me with science guy who went crazy from like, people coming up to him and going science. You know what I mean? I mean, like, it's not. But I don't feel like that. But I definitely, people definitely know me from that, and I'm grateful for it. I mean, it's a fantastic film with a lot of massive staying power and great universals, and I'm glad that people know me from one thing because it's good to have at least one. So
Yeah, and
that's a good one
look,
to have. So
People don't just know you; they love you, and they love the movie. And we've got some questions. We put out the word that you're going to be on the show. There was excitement. We got some questions for you about it. We're gonna shoot a few over to you soon. But before
that's
we
sweet.
do,
Thank you for saying that, man. I'm glad that people like me. It's good. Good to know, man. So
absolutely. But let's go back a little further first, because I found it really interesting to know that you grew up in Evanston, Illinois. Is that
I
correct?
did. Yeah, I did. Yeah,
And
Chicago, Evanston. Yep, for the most part. Which is a breeding ground for many extremely talented, and we always tease there's something in the water. You know, I mean, that's the home of John Cusack and Jeremy Piven and DVD Vincentis and many others. You know, yeah, I did, and it was a deeply utopian, interracial, and fair city, and I grew up being accepted very much, and I think that um, is a very open-minded place, and I really didn't want for anything growing up. I mean, my parents were not very well to do, but we but it was a very wholesome um, a place to grow up. And there was a big film renaissance in Chicago as I was, going into my early preteens and teens and beyond. And it just so happened that happened to I booked the lead in a feature opposite Michael Keaton when I was 11 from an open call. My teacher in school, her son was this amazing actor called Adam Baldwin, who's not of the Baldwins, but from My Bodyguard and Full Metal Jacket and many things like that in the 80s. A phenomenal actor. And I was kind of a teacher's pet, and I was wandering around like I was read to all the time as a kid. So I was like doing Shakespeare to myself and nerding out and all this kind of stuff. And she noticed that, and she was like, "I think you make a pretty cool, pretty good actor." And
hmm,
anyway, it's a long-winded story, but nevertheless, I after many callbacks, I ended up getting the lead in that film, and then working consistently for a little while, and then quitting when I was about 14 to go back to school, and then getting back into acting around 16 after having gone to the Stratford Festival and remembered that I was wanting to do Shakespeare and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I grew up there. I don't know why all that came out in that one thing, but it's been a good long road
we
for me.
we've heard about the general Chicago area at least once on this show. I know I'm thinking back to our conversation. For those of you who haven't checked it out, go back to the archives. We've had Lacey Goranson from the
Oh,
Connors and
Lisa's my dear
Roseanne.
friend. She's tremendous.
Oh,
Yep,
okay.
she's also from Evanston. You
That's
know,
what I was going to say. It was the
yeah.
same town, huh?
Yeah,
Wow.
she took an early flight just recently to come watch me and Waiting for Godot here in the city. It was really gratifying. We're good friends, and she tore it up. Mike Shannon, who also is a great, I mean, the great Mike Shannon,
Yeah.
the tremendous Mike Shannon. We were both in that together, and he's also spent time in Evanston. He's not from there, but he was there a year, and we all knew each other as young people. So
Wow.
she knew that we were both in this production, and she was meant to come back, but she came home early to see us, and that's amazing. So yeah, there is a deep sort of old school camaraderie from the
Hmm.
people that came up there. So
That's awesome. That's
yeah,
awesome. I just want to go back real quick to what you said about, starting so early, 13, 14. You get these roles, you do
11. So anyway,
oh,
yeah,
11 is when
11.
oh my goodness.
Yeah,
You get this role alongside Michael Keaton, who
yeah.
at that time he was already Michael Keaton, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
he was. He was really becoming Michael Keaton at the time. Yeah, he had just finished Mr. Mom and Johnny Dangerously and what? Oh yeah, Night Shift. So yeah, he was starting to really blow up. I mean, he had blown up, but yeah.
yeah. So it's interesting. I'm looking at the trifecta here. You're working with Michael Keaton. You're on an after-school special, which is like a thing back then,
Yeah,
and then you appear on MacGyver, which
yeah,
first season, so maybe not as much of a thing then, but certainly a thing now to look back on.
right.
A lot of
Uh,
cool experiences, and then you walk away as a kid.
right. I well, I didn't. It wasn't just those. I mean, I went to I went to Brazil and did a film there for like 7 months with Charles Durning, and I did the thing. But I did, yeah, I walked away around 14 because I was just getting ready to do. I had been offered the role of Cockroach on the Cosby Show, and Anson Williams, who played Potsy on Happy Days,
Yeah.
was directed that after school special, which garnered Emmys and things like that. And he kind of had some say. And um, you know, I was I'm as we've talked about. I'm from Evanston. I grew up like breakdancing, and I was like punk rock, and I wanted to go back and you know hang out with my friends and smoke pot and go to shows and do things like my friends were doing. And I was, particularly having been in films and stuff like that, my friends were and having been a breakdancer and gone around and spent so much time you know going to grown up kids music shows and doing all these things. I most of the young people that I was meeting in Hollywood and in California, and the way they wanted them portrayed, were not at all things that I were connecting to. And I was like, these people are just weird. I mean, this is like an indication of what the young people are like. I don't feel I fit in to that portrayal. Even the roles that I did play when I was younger were troubled or uh, on the outside of things, and kind of different to what the atypical sort of thing was at that time. Which is this kind of really bright-eyed, weird thing that I just couldn't connect to that. I didn't see it as truthful. So it was also the kind of work that was coming down the pike for me at the time wasn't what I thought would be. It wasn't. I wasn't connecting with it, so I couldn't really play it. Because
Right.
when you're that young, you're playing from an instinctual place. You're not trying to find beats and through lines and all these things that people are doing. You're just doing it. Do you know what I mean? And so yeah. But I walked away from it at that time, without any kind of weirdness. It was just like, oh yeah, no, I'm not doing that for a while. You know, I shouldn't have. I should have stayed, but I don't regret it. I just think that that was my choice.
It's interesting looking at your history because, again, it's so diverse. All the different types of work that you've done, all the different types of projects and outlets and everything, and all the different people that you've worked with. We talk about, you know, working with Michael Keaton from the very, very beginning. Um, Now you come back to film acting in 1996,
Yeah.
and you're in a movie that gets a lot of buzz called Suburbia.
Yes.
Was that project part did that pull you back toward that direction, or had you already decided that you wanted to re-enter films, or how did that work out?
No, it was a sort of a really how shall I say? It was a very um, fortuitous and kind of interesting, for me anyway, journey back in. Before I went to ART school, before I went to conservatory for acting, had just been offered the play of Suburbia at Lincoln Center. While I was there at ART in my first in my first couple of weeks, Eric Bogosian, who wrote Suburbia, happened to be playing at ART. And then in one of our classes with Robert Brustein, where we discuss American theater, Eric Bogosian was the celebrity guest. And he was in the middle of talking about things. And then he turned and he looked at me and he was like, wait, aren't you supposed to be doing my play right now? And Robert Brustein jumped in and was like, Jay has decided to not do your play and to stay in school where he'll be. And I hadn't made that decision. Robert Brustein made that decision. And I was like, yeah. So when I got out of school, I heard, and I had no, I was not submitted for it. I didn't know it was a friend of mine said, hey, just randomly actor chat. A friend of mine said, because there was no internet. A friend of mine was like, they're making the movie of that play that you were going to do before. I was like, really? And I called me. I was, I'd like to be submitted and say, they're like, but you can't speak Urdu. And I was like, were you considering submitting me? So they're like, yeah. I was like, please submit me. And yes, I can do it if it happens to be. So I submitted, and I went in, and Rick Linklater had just finished doing Dazed and Confused, and like it was a big deal. And Eric Bogosian, I went in and worked on it really, really hard, and went in there. And while I was in my audition, Eric Bogosian happened to be there. In those days, people would be in the room, and I just reminded him that I was maybe going to do the play, and they, I got it, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, having gone back into it, it got me. I was working very methodically and very, and the part was contradicted and beautiful and kind of timely, and so I felt very happy to have gotten it. And having gone back out into film, it was as though I had. I mean, heading to LA for the rehearsals and stuff like that. It was like a very strange recall for me. I was like, this is it's completely. It's like the same, but not at all the same. And it was a cool thing. And then I got a nomination for an Independent Spirit Award for that, which was. While I was doing it, I was like, this feels like I'm doing well. I mean, like while I was working on it, and I thought, oh, I hope people see this movie. I had no kind of idea that it would be that good for me.
Yeah.
But it was, and I was working with very sort of methodical, clear drama school beats and intentions and things like that. So to be the guy who was fastidious and academic and sort of erudite, but also very picked on, was easy because that's how it was. You know what I mean? It was kind of like it wasn't much of a stretch. And then also that coming back into Hollywood, where now all of a sudden I was like an Indian guy, and became that for many things. When I was younger, I was always like a Latino dude. You know what I mean? Or like, and that was in the old days when you could do that, until the Latino Anti-Defamation League marched against me when I was getting ready to book this big feature short. Oh, that was also another thing that happened when I was around 14. I had come back from doing a movie in Brazil, and Chris Kane, who had directed That Was Then, This Is Now, and also the film that I did in Brazil, which was Where the River Runs Black, wanted to cast me in The Principal, with Jim Belushi, and in this part of this young Latino dude, and the Latino Anti-Defamation League marched out front of his office and said, no, not him. He keeps doing it, and so he keeps getting these parts. And so but now then when I came back as an Indian person, all of a sudden it was like, everything I went on was for South Asian things. And in those days, it was a very different time. Ethnocentrically, it had to be like, oh, is he, what kind of Indian guy is he? You know what I mean? And for me, I was always like, well, let's be specific, and let's try and make this truthful and stuff like that. But coming down the pike is were parts that what within our community we call patanking, which is like, he's the Indian guy, you know what I mean? And blah, 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 blah. So and I was kind of like, for me now, when I hear the kids say like, I would never do that, I'm like, well, that's because you don't have to do that. I mean, when we were coming up, that was what was available, and I was like making my money as an actor, not as anything else. I'm still doing that, and it's a very tough. I mean, it's a tough business. I mean, it's very erratic, and in the theaters where I got to play whatever I wanted to, and in films, I got what I got, and didn't say no.
It's fun. It's so funny to think, and I could be thinking about this in the wrong time frame as well. But it feels to me that a movie like Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, as silly as it sounds, was groundbreaking in that way, as far as Kumar being able to just be a
Be
dude.
him, right?
Yeah,
In those days, I was so jealous of Cal. Like, I was like, oh God, Cal gets to do it. You know what I mean? And I was like, why can't I? And I love Cal now. As far as what he's been through and how he's come out. I've always liked him, but I mean, like now I have this sort of incredible respect for him, especially having come forward as he did about his sexuality and his person, and for what he must have been going through, which is I can't even opine on what it must have been for him. But I was glad that he was able to play as himself, and as a young dude, and it, that aspect of it was wonderful. I mean, and make no mistake, I already said I was extremely jealous because I was already from an earlier time where I had kind of this was the shtick that
right.
people were like, can you do it? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I guess, as long as I can do what I think is right without overstepping the kind of, badness of it, or the
Yeah,
racist, derogatory aspect of it. I was like, look, there's nothing wrong with clowning. I mean, not everyone can do it right. Not everyone can play their dad well, or their uncle, or some
right.
random Indian person. But it's yeah. I mean, it was a huge Rubicon in the business, and while I am glad that people talk a great deal about diversity now and all that stuff, I also realize that it's white people who decide what's diverse. So I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just trying to lay it out there that it's not just the diverse people that are deciding. It's a lot of people. So
Yeah, yeah. Um, I want to ask you, and thank you so much. We've talked so long, we haven't even hit on Office Space yet. But before we get there, we keep talking about all these really notable people that you've been able to work with on screen or behind the camera,
yes.
etc. I want to ask you about Darren Aronofsky, and I want to tell you a story because uh, Darren did a movie back in, I think it came out in 2008, called The Wrestler,
Oh yes.
and I was working at that time uh, in that scene in pro wrestling as a
Wow.
play-by-play guy, and I
Wow.
was I was there, and I was a part of the scene that was filmed. It's for those who remember the movie, it was the first wrestling scene in the movie. It took place in like a Knights of Columbus or something like that in northern Jersey, and it was a 2 day shoot. They had a real wrestling show, and in between, the whole crew would come out. Mickey Rourke would come out. They'd film the scene for this match. That was it was the first match that they showed the main character of the movie wrestling. And I'm sitting there, and me and the color commentator, his name was Sean Cradle. Um, we're looking around, and I'm like, "Is that the guy from Office Space?" He's like, "I don't know." And I mean, look, we're not part of the movie scene, right? So this is kind of cool and exciting. We're part of this 2 day movie shoot. We're going to be a part of this thing, and all we could talk about for the next 2 hours was we have to find out if that was the guy from Office Space, and we were never able to. I don't remember, and you weren't in the movie, to be clear, but you were there, right? That was
No,
you.
I was in the movie very, very briefly. I play the medic. I play the guy who comes in, kind of super glues this cut for Mickey Rourke. Now
Okay.
now okay, we were there together. Yes. Uh,
Mhm.
to answer that, I remember that shoot. I found it. I was kind of blown away by the nightmare that was that world. I mean, I was deeply shocked. I had no idea that it was anything that the I guess I don't know what strata of wrestling world that is, or what it would be called.
Yeah.
because we're only used to the glitz of like the WWF or like something like that. I imagined that there was like substrata wrestling worlds, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember from the '80s it was like grungy and scary and funny and tough like that, but I didn't quite grasp what that world was until I was at that shoot and realized what was happening. And so Darren, shall I segue into Darren and I? Darren, when Darren made a film, his first film, that kind of that made sort of a big splash was a movie called Pi, and in those days, Darren was like a rough and tumble New York filmmaker, and all of the people that he was liking were the people that were in the movie. And I was in Pi. I then became a voice on the other side of the wall in Pi, but I was in it as his neighbor, his tough, jealous neighbor who was jealous of a woman who had just played my wife in Suburbia. So her name was Samia Shoahid, and I played her husband in Pi, and she was the girl next door in Pi, who, so I kind of beat him up every day, even though I just came off a movie where I was getting beaten up every day. So I was like so I was giving it back to him, but it ended up kind of getting cut, but the guy's presence is still there, sort of. And I got like third billing because it was going to Sundance, and at the time Suburbia was opening at Sundance, and so it was other things that I was in. So I was in a bunch of indies that were coming up at Sundance that year. So I kind of got third billing on the movie, even though I wasn't like really in it. But Darren and I remained friends, and then he pulled me on to another movie that he was doing called Requiem for a Dream. And I was to play opposite Ellen Burstyn, and it was I was to play the mailman, and I was like, "It's the mailman," and he was like, "No, he's the messenger." And like, Darren is a very exacting and very interesting director. I mean, he works. I mean, his thoughts are complex and contradicted, and he's trying to build a world around the people that are the center of the film, of the films. And he was doing that initially when he was conceiving his movies. He always did that in sort of a Kubrickian sense, and that he was like using people that he knew to fill out that world, characters. And I respected that deeply. I thought that's a great thing. If you have an ensemble that you respect and that you want to continue to use, I think that's that's the dream. You know what I mean? To be part of something like that. So I function as an ensemble of an ensemble member of Darren's cinematic oeuvre. You know what I mean? So that is how I that is the Darren story. Now we could talk about Darren Aronofsky all day long, but how I'm involved is that I helped and was in Pi. I was in Requiem for a Dream. I played the medic in The Wrestler, and he just produced a film that I was also in called The Good Nurse that he spoke up for me on when I was in auditions for it. So we also share the same birthday, and we're friends.
Yeah. So. It's fun. It was such an interesting experience, I would say, the Wrestler, because you guys were coming into this world that you were so unfamiliar with and seeing it play out for real, because
Right.
It was the real environment. And at the same time, you were exposing everybody there to the movie making aspect of things on that level. And it was kind of eye-opening, I think, for everyone involved. I think there was a locker room full of people who were sure that they were launching their movie careers that day.
I mean, I was like, dang, look at all these dudes in their underwear. I mean, like, it's crazy. And they're all like greasy. You know what I mean? I was like, wow, check it out. And, but I will say, towards a more specific thing, Darren spoke to me, and I, I don't know if this is talking out of school or not, but he was like, Mickey's kind of sensitive about people touching his face,
Okay.
and I was like, okay. And he's like, that's why that's why I got you, because I knew that you would be like cool with him. And I was like, oh, all right, great. You know, he's like, yeah, your energy is like,
Wow.
you know, it'll be kind of like soothing and clinical. You know what I mean? Kind of just like keep it down like that. Because I came in there gangbusters, get up out of the way. Blah. He's like, no. You know what I mean? Just like be a cool guy. Don't be part of their world. Be in your own sort of clinical, quiet, gentle world. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Because then I watched the little scene, and while you only see like a little bit of me and like doing like, okay, listen, you're gonna be. I kind of liked it because it sort of the environment was so like wow, you know, that it made it feel it to play in contradiction to that and have Darren kind of steer me towards that was
Yeah.
a cool acting choice, I thought, you know. And I felt gratified that Mickey was. He was like, no, man, you can get on me, man. You can touch. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, because that knowing that he didn't really like people doing that, and then having him be okay with me being up on him was nice. It was a
Yeah.
kind of a trust thing, which was it was an interesting experience. I mean, it was horrible to be out there in that shoot. It was very uncomfortable, but it was that's the world that he was making. So, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, I think it's time. We overshot into the 2000s, but we need to go back to the 90s. We need to go back again to that project that I think are bringing a lot of the viewers to the yard here as far as wanting to catch up with you.
Okay.
It's just, it's truly iconic. We're talking about, of course, Office Space, Mike Judge at the helm, a comedy that has somehow transcended time and I think is still looked at as not just a classic, but also still absolutely unique in the world and the way that it was able to present it. How did you? We'll start at the beginning. How did you come to play the part of Samir?
Well, it was a pretty traditional a traditional entrance. I was in California. I was living in with a friend in Malibu,
Yeah,
and in those days they used to send the whole script. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like on thing. So my agent sent me the script with a note saying this is really cool. Everyone wants to be in this. Please, you know, the role that you should do, Samir. And I was like, okay. And I looked at it and I read it, and I mean when I read it, I thought this movie was tremendous. I mean, like on the page, it was like this. It was exactly as I was like feeling. Comedy should be at that time, which was rooted in a sense of miserablism, in a sense of dehumanization in the workplace. I mean, it was like kind of a very, I mean, there was a scene that's not in the movie where Peter walks out on the edge of this monorail and looks out onto this apocalyptic, uh, like industrial park that stretches to the horizon. You know what I mean? And then they fade out in the second act. I mean, it was like it was as I read it, I was like, oh my god! And the insidious nature of the workplace and stuff was very vivid to me. So, but anyway, I was like, okay, cool, you know. And I mean, I like the part. And when I was going to, my friend drove me to go to the audition, and it was in Hollywood. And as I was going, I was like, you know, this guy, you know, he doesn't seem like an Indian guy, you know, per se. You know, he seems like he's like a Middle Eastern. You know, it feels Middle Eastern. So I was like trying it on, you know, like, oh, he's different, you know, he's different than like a normal Indian guy, you know, like he's like, and he was like, well, man, don't try to do it until you can like nail it. My buddy, he was a great actor, and he was like, just try. And I was like, no, I think I'm gonna try. You know, I don't care. I'm just gonna fool around and see what happens. So I had an audition out there, and it went good. And like, you know, it was funny because I remember it was in a Hollywood bungalow. I'm trying to remember. I think it was at Fox Lot, I think, must have been. And who was in waiting in line to audition for it was James Spader. I was like, there was people there that was like, oh wow, you know. So I did this audition, and it was cool, and I didn't think anything of it. But then
hmm
a little while later, I came back to New York after I finished what I was working on, and which was a series at the time, and called Late Line with Al Franken, and I was like, I don't know, I was getting some action, and Suburbia had gotten me this nomination, and then I was like, wow, and then so I found out that they call my people call me, they're like, Mike Judge wants to meet with you. And I was like, okay, cool, and they're like, okay, so it's 4 seasons, and you go and you meet him. So I went and I met him, and I met him in the lobby, and he was like the coolest, smartest, most engaging person, one of the most engaging people I'd ever met. From the second I met him, he was like, hey, and so connected and so brilliant, and he just said, so you think, you could play this part? I mean, it wasn't even like it wasn't even like some kind of, like, who are you? And, it was none of that stuff. And I was like, yes, absolutely. I was like, I'd like to do him differently, though. I'd like to do him as someone from the Middle East, and I'd like to get coached in terms of his dialect so that it could be like authentic, because I think that he's probably not from India. I think he's probably he feels like he's from like Jordan or like Egypt. And he's like, Jordan. So that's a cool thing, and like we just kind of stuff. And I ended up, and then I got it. And it was like, not on the spot. He wasn't like, okay, you're going to play the part. It wasn't like that. But I mean, like, it was a traditional thing that it came out of. And I was like, oh, cool. You know what I mean? And it's in Austin. I was like, oh, amazing. I just did Suburbia there. And like, and what, Austin was Hollywood at that time. You know what I mean? It was the place to go, to shoot. And I'll just say that none of us knew that it was going to be what it became. The studio did not like this movie from the get-go, and was very rough on Mike and everyone in it. Not to me personally, because I didn't really matter. I was like, who's this guy? You know what I mean? Like, but to Ron, they were rough, and they were like, it's not funny. These guys are ugly. Et cetera, et cetera. The music is wrong. Mike had to fight for that, and like, all this kind of stuff, that like all of the different aspects of it that make it what it is were naysayed and said to be not right. So the fact that it made it through. So, and then when it played in the theater, it was there a week.
Yeah.
It was pulled. It was called a failure. All of this, with the advent of DVDs, this movie began to, later on, when I was on the ski lift and some big bro was like, yo! So the only time I ever knew that this movie was making any headway. You know what I mean? And then later on, I got pulled aside by some, like, I was out front of this cigar store. I tell this story all the time. I was out front of this cigar store, and I think he must have been like some kind of like gangster. This comes out and he's like, excuse me, come in here. And I was like, oh shit. Go in there. A bunch of these dudes around, all like real hardcore, and they're like, we just want to let you know we're big. We thought it was very authentic the way you did the printer. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, yeah. So I mean, like, people got started fanning out on it, and like the reason I think for that is because that is what the young people at that time had to look forward to, is that when they got out of school, and that was what the world was, and that kind of comedy, while alien to the people in charge of the corporate machine,
Right.
was in direct revolution to who they were personally. So that is why they were like, no, you know what I mean? Because it's like to hold, as it were, the mirror up to thing. You know what I mean? So yeah, and these dudes, all these guys working these drones, they're not like nerds that are like, the tech bro of that time was not, they weren't all nerds, man. They were all like cool people going out to like raves and like, DJs, and like, they had to turn up to that, you know what I mean? And that's what so I think that the success lies in the fact that it was just like laying it on the line about what that space was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's my long-winded intro to how I got in the movie.
Well, look, I think personally that the appeal of the movie is about, again, like, showing that world from that perspective, what that the corporate landscape looks like, and the prospects of being a part of it, and what choices you have at at that point in your life. I think it's also because the characters themselves, even apart from that, are nuanced they feel real, they feel fully fleshed out, and they
Full.
feel like uniquely relatable. Like I remember the character of Michael Bolton, that moment where he's listening to, like, I don't remember what he's listening. He's listening to something, some
Yeah.
rap music, like loudly in the car,
Yeah.
and then when he pulls up near people, he's kind of like he's
Yeah.
closing the window or he's turning
It's a
down
little
the.
old black man who walks
Yeah,
by and he feels real stuff. Yeah, yeah. I think it's Scarface, but I'm not sure. It's Ghetto Boys all the way through, but
yeah.
I think that one is Scarface. I'm not sure, but yeah, that my wife loves that moment too. She thinks that that's like deeply, deeply universal and very, very vulnerable. So it's like, yeah, I mean, of course, you know, Mike is thinks in that way. I mean, he. I think the vulnerability is, you know, really prized above all else, and that kind of, you know, um, that kind of humanity is where the strength of it lies. And yes, every actor in that was incredibly full, and vivid, and we were having a blast. You know what I mean? Like when you get to play and get to bring yourself to it, um, you know, that then miracles happen. You know, so.
What did you think about the character of Samir, as far as just everything about him? Or, uh, origin story aside, so to speak, but just about like what made this guy tick, and what was on the page versus what kind of came through as far as your performance and throughout the filming. What what did you like the most about him,
Yeah, I
and
mean, like the
all?
thing I liked about him, I mean, I mean, which is whether or not it came through or not is up for grabs. But you know, I don't think he fancied himself like a follower. Do you know what I mean? I think, and he has an incredible sense of rage. You know, that I
Yes,
think that I think is like, um, you know, I think fair. You know, I mean, like it's legit. Like he's not you know, he's been dehumanized in such a way. I mean, ethnographically too. You know what I mean? Like when the lady's like Samir Night, yeah, and he's like, no, please don't, just don't try. You know what I mean? Like he's on the other side. He's almost on the other side of it, but he's not a wimp. Do you know what I mean? And he wants change and he wants things. And when he finds out that he's being shafted after having given pure work ethic and having given like an innocent and upstanding uh,
effort.
effort
Yeah,
to the company, I think that his sense of rage at that overboils. You know what I
it's,
mean?
I never thought about this before. I may be the first person on this planet to say it, but I'm going to say that Samir, for those of you who are Marvel fans, Samir is Office Space's Steve Rogers, because when you look at, all right, just follow me, all you nerds out there.
No,
If you
it's
follow
cool.
the journey of Steve Rogers, he's the guy who follows the law to the letter. He's upholding the American institution
There you
and
go.
principles to the letter until he finds out that there's corruption. Everything he believed in was full of it. Now, Samir, you see that part in the beginning of the movie where uh, it's mentioned, what if we're still here when we're 50 years old? And it'd be nice to have that kind of job
Job
security.
security,
He's just
exactly.
happy to contribute until he
Absolutely.
realizes it's all BS.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. That is exactly very astute and kind of. I'm grateful for that for you having made that trajectory, because that is the thing that I was able to kind of bite into with him, is that, you know, oh my, you like, how could they do this to me? I'm like, I loved them. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, he might not like all the different, you know, little slights along the way, you know what I mean? And it's hard to get to work when people aren't driving nicely, and you know it's a terrible environment and whatever it is, and there's not really anything human about it. But he likes his friends, and he's happy to have his job, and like they even ask him like, what would you do if you had $1 million? I called my friend down in Count Asadullah, and tell him like let's invest, and he's got like I don't know if like, but a lot of people don't know, but like I was like, oh man, I think he should dress like he kind of cares. You know what I mean? Like purple and like like he should be a little bit more flamboyant about his like wanting to be cool. I mean, he drives like drives like a Firebird. You know what I mean? Like he's trying to like be cool, and whether or not he is not. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, but I thought that I think that he really wants to fight his corner, and I think that a lot of those dudes were trying to fight their corner. You know what I mean? Especially people that aren't from this country. You know what I mean? Make an extra effort to be down. You know what I mean? And to be cool and like be part of it in that way. So that is how I kind of how I sort of springboarded in my imagination with him. But I gotta say, it was mad fun to be with like Ron and those guys, and they foil you beautifully. You know what I mean? And it felt nice to foil them. You know what I mean? And it was really organic. I mean, like the scene where we come home and party and I break dance and all this kind of stuff. That I just happened to be when I at that time like still breakdancing quite a bit, and like I was breakdancing with this little Indian crew down in Austin, who were my friends, just not part of the movie, but I was still breaking, like going out and like doing all this kind of stuff. So it just kind of worked its way into the movie, you know what I mean? Which then like I was really gratified by, because all my old breaker friends and all the people that know me from my b-boy days, which at the time I was like raving, you know what I mean? And like going around and like, I dance, I was like big into drum and bass. I'm still big into drum and bass, but at that time I was like going out to parties and dancing. That was the other thing I was doing was, besides acting was that. So it like just the fact that I got that one kind of like moment to kind of let Samir shine out, made me feel really gratified, So
A couple more questions about the movie. Again, people just want to know all about this thing. They're still watching it all the time. It's
yeah.
just never gone away. What would you say? I'm going to combine these two. What's the line, Samir's line, that's quoted back to you the most, and what is your favorite Samir line?
Yeah, okay. Like if the person is not very sensitive, because it's naga gonna work here. Okay, there's people that come up to me and say that. Now, when that was happening, I mean, of course, that's a genius improvisation by Paul, and like he nailed that, and I think it's hilarious and beautiful. But I only came to see the sort of the deep surreptitious racism in it when it was taken out of context. Do you know what I mean? I love that in the movie. It's perfect. Yeah. That guy is right. But the fact that someone laughed a little too hard at that, that makes me a little bit. It's like Dave Chappelle, right? I mean, like, the one guy, he laughed a little too hard and I walked. You know what I mean? So like if people, I mean, naga work here, that's some people do that. But there are, I mean, like people say all kinds of stuff. I can't remember everything, but that one sticks out because of its kind of nature. You know what I mean? It's kind of, it walks the line.
Yeah.
And I'm not mad when people do it in a cool way, but I am mad when people laugh at it a little too hard. You know what I mean? So it's like it's interesting because it's doing exactly what it should do, which is make you feel a little uncomfortable, but also it's an awkward thing, and that's the real juice. So that's the one I'm going to say people say to me a lot, but it's not the only one. My favorite line of Samir's is yes, I'm also not a pussy. So that's I mean, and it just kind of like, and the other one that I thought I would like the most is like, if you like this girl so much, why don't you just ask her out? You know what I mean? Like, why don't you go by Mike? I mean, I like all of his solves for them. Those are the ones that always make me feel most like kind of like part of it. You know what I mean? Like, why don't you just go by Mike instead of Michael?
Like that's his role in
Yeah,
the group.
he loves those guys, man. You know, that's the other thing is like he's like I think he really really loves those guys. You know, because they give him a place. You know, they give him a chance, and they he's not just like some dude. You know,
And
he's not.
that's the thing. We love the characters because they're great characters. We also love them a little bit more, I think, because they love each other. Because it's such a
Yeah.
great, there's such great chemistry. That's going to lead to the final question about this, which I'm sure you get all the time.
Let's
Um,
see.
and I can't imagine that it hasn't been mentioned or thought of or conceived. What if we did a sequel? What if we brought this back in some way? Um, what kinds of discussions have you heard about that over the years? Has it just been brought up
Well,
beyond?
uh, here, like Walmart bought a piece of office space, and a few of us did like a thing for them for like their Cyber Monday commercial thing, which was like which where they caught up with a few of us at this time in our lives
Mm,
on Monday and how we deal with it and stuff like that. But they fictionalized it as like it was like Samir and Diedrich's character and Lumberg and like things like that.
that's awesome.
But Mike would never sequel this movie, and with good reason. It stands alone. And I don't want to opine on how or what Mike would, you know. People have talked about. People are like, "Oh, you got to do another one." I'm like, "Really? You do?" I mean, I think it functions as itself,
Yeah.
and I think Mike thinks that. But I also know that it was a hard. I think this was the toughest movie for Mike because he was called. They called it a flop,
Right.
and he refused to accept that. And I think with good reason because it didn't fucking flop. Do you know what I mean? It didn't. It like achieved. So that's the weird thing. And he was like, he's like, it just wasn't given the right. It wasn't given the right.
Push. Yeah.
Yeah. Or they just didn't do it right. They didn't market it right, or they didn't. They weren't behind it in the way that they needed to be from the beginning. You know what I mean? Even though they wanted to see, they wanted like Matt Damon to play Peter, and like what I mean, like it was a whole other thing. And I mean, like so I think while they understand that Mike is a genius, I think that they didn't know how he was a genius and in what way to make the story shine. He needed to do it. So I think that and I don't think that it's his ego. I just think that he's a very wildly intelligent person and would be like, no, it's not. I'm not going to sequel that. They you know. So and I do think that it it would. I think that if you did sequel it, which I mean, I would never. I mean, if Mike was going to do it, or if Mike wanted to, I don't know what he would. I don't know what he would do. You know what I mean? Like I don't know how you would what is the inescapable world now when everyone is working remotely and doing their like I mean that was part of the Walmart thing, which was like, oh, now you're at home and chilling with your family and like in your pajamas and stuff and like you are, and I mean that partly Office Space. I mean, of course, pandemic bred this new way, but also like for many years now, people in the corporate structure show Office Space so that people are like, let's not make this be an office space office. You know what I mean? It's turned into a thing where it's like it has changed the face of the landscape in such a way. I mean, like TGI Fridays stopped Flair. You know what I mean? And like different things happened as a result of the cultural phenomenon of the film. So it would be tough to be like, hey, let's go back, like let's try and find a. I don't know how they would do it. I mean, personally, I don't know how they would do it. I'm sure that there's brilliant dudes who are like, I'll tell you exactly how to remake it, but I don't know what how they would do it,
There's
so
there's definitely
that's my two bits on that. And I do think it's kind of like incredible that it like kind of um its ending is satisfying in such a way that like to reopen it is like, why? And I mean, the other aspect of it that I always loved about it is kind of, and I've likened this movie again and again to The Killing. Do you know The Killing by Stanley Kubrick? Anyway, I keep Kubrick. It's the third time in this interview I keep talking about it, but all the money flies away in the end of The Killing. He's like, the whole thing goes kaput, and that is kind of what really happened to the movie too, right? So it just like went kaput. But then the fact that it did that was torrential. It had like quadruple meanings, and so sequeling it would be while that might be a blast. Um, Odd,
it's
maybe.
hard to put the toothpaste back in the
Correct.
the
Correct.
yeah.
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 Yeah. That one was a good spill. You know what I mean? So it spilled
Right.
out nicely. Right.
Exactly. Um, look, there's I mean, we could keep you here for 5 more hours and talk about Office Space and all the other things that we skipped over throughout your amazingly illustrious and multifaceted career.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
yeah, no, but I do want to ask you before we get you out of here is what's going on these days? What do you have
Oh,
coming up? What's
yeah. So I've been really lucky through uh, pandemic and the recent time, the strike and so forth. This past year, I was in a production of Waiting for Godot with Mike Shannon and Paul Sparks, and another great actor called Jeff Beal, and another young man called Toussaint Baptiste. And it was a peak experience for me in the theater. It was absolutely one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I mean, it goes way, way, way up high, and it's hard for me to follow up. But shortly thereafter, I did a show that's now beginning to air and is going for a second season called Elspeth with Carrie Preston and Wendell Pierce. Both of them just amazing, amazing people, and the show is really, really good. And I was very pleased to do that. So that I hope that there's more coming of that for me. I'm just now getting ready to do a marvelous film here in the city, which is its working title was Bunny, but now it's called Shibori, and it's a really cool New York film that some friends of mine have been working on for quite some time, but is now getting a really proper telling. And it reminds me of like After Hours or Do the Right Thing. I mean, it's a very New York story. And it shoots here in one building and one block between now and July, and then at the end of summer, it seems like it feels like I will be getting ready to do a film about the life of Vivian Lee, that a great friend of mine who was also in Suburbia called Jace Bartok wrote. And those two things I'm really looking forward to at this particular moment. But but to but to say to be honest, it's the business is very erratic, and sometimes totally vibrant and sometimes dead. So it's been significant times for all actors now, and with the advent of AI and things like that. And there's no such thing as pilot season anymore, which used to be a thing. Which, every February, they'd make like 100 things, and it's a huge wave, and there was a lot of pressure, and you got to book something and all this kind of stuff. But now it's all the way through the year with the advent of cable and streaming and all this stuff. So, but I kind of like that aspect better because you're always kind of on your game. and a
Right,
little
right.
less pressure, as opposed to like having to do it really hard during this particular time. So, you know, I'm staying open and looking forward to things. I also wrote a film that I really hope to make. That's been getting some really good feedback about my brother and my father, who were both almost pro level badminton players, and had a very interesting relationship on and off the court. It's set during 1979-80 Winter Olympics in Chicago.
Nice.
And yeah, so I'm coming closer on that story. It's very dear to me, so I hope to get some traction on it soon.
Awesome.
So, but it's been some good people coming on board to kind of help and push it forward. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Awesome. And I mean, as you've mentioned, we've heard it so many times on this show, the business of entertainment in general, up, down, peaks, valleys. But luckily, you've been able to do so many things over the course of your career. And luckily for us, we've been able to watch you do all these things throughout your career. And
Oh well, I'm
looks like
very grateful for the
that's
faith, and very grateful for the nice comment. It can be really tough, but
yeah.
it's okay.
Well, yeah. Well, you got cool things coming up. And
Thanks.
even as we continue to revisit the classic stuff, we look forward to the new stuff. And look, man, you have spent a lot of time sharing with us. We appreciate it so much, and thank you for being on the show, man. It's been
Thank you
great.
so much, Jerry. It was a marvelous interview, and I'm so grateful for you taking interest in the work. And thank you very much.
And thank you guys too. Of course, 90s to now. You can find us now on YouTube, on Apple, on Spotify. Watch us, listen to us anywhere you can find us. Of course, all over social media as well. Follow us, join our Friends Forever VIP club, and it gives you exclusive access to send your questions to your favorite stars and a whole lot more. And till next time, we'll see you on 90s to now. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ajay.
Bye.